Welcome back, everybody, to His Heartbeat. I once again have a beautiful woman here, Jodi Hendricks. Thanks for joining us, Jodi.
Well, thank you so much, Sue, for having me.
Yeah, well, those of you on YouTube, you can see she has a wonderful book out, hashtag no filter, that we'll get into talking about. And it very much overlaps with Crown of Beauty. Jodi, ours is actually called Crown of Beauty 12-week Women's Bible Study. And yours is also a Bible study, right?
Yes, it is. It is an 8-week Bible
Eight
study.
week? Yeah, 12 weeks is hard for people. I'm learning that. My team is like, could you split that in half? And I've been thinking about that, but I have some that persevere. I do it online as well. So, well, let's dive in. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then we can jump into your story.
Yeah, well, I'm married. I have been married for 17 years to a wonderful man, and we have four beautiful children. My oldest
Okay.
is 16, and then my son, my only boy out of the four, is 13. He's a little bitter that he doesn't have any sisters, but he's pushing through. And then my two younger girls are 10 and 8. And my husband and I met when I was going to school out in South Carolina, where I went to college. And um, I brought him back home to New Mexico, where I'm originally from. And so that's where we serve in ministry and where we have our businesses right now. I grew up in a Christian home, and I'm so thankful for that. I came to
Yeah.
know the Lord at a very young age. And I've just had my whole life, I've just had that desire to serve the Lord and to fulfill the purpose that He has placed on my life, which I believe we all have that
Yeah.
purpose to glorify our Father in heaven. And so my life has really been focused on how I can do that. And of course, there's times where we kind of get confused with, what am I here for and where is my focus? But God's grace is always good, and He always kind of just brings us back to refocusing, and that's something that I've had the honor and privilege to be able to walk through many times with the Lord throughout my life. So right now we are serving at our church. My husband is the worship pastor at our church,
Oh, cool.
and I lead the women's ministry. I'm the director of women's ministry at our church, and currently expanding that women's ministry across state and country borders. So we're really excited about the possibilities there.
Oh, that's cool. We'll have to hear more about that in a little bit. But I had read a little bit about your story, and you, though, started off, happily ever after, a very wonderful childhood. Went to Christian college, is that right?
Yes, I
Yeah,
did.
yeah, and then got married to a wonderful man, and had your first child, and then you say the challenges began. So what was going on with that?
Yes. Well, I was raised in that Christian home, and unfortunately kind of in a bubble where you just have these
Mm,
expectations of what life should look like and will look like. And you kind of get these expectations of what marriage looks like, of what motherhood looks like. And I grew up in an era where we don't really talk about our problems. We don't really talk
mm.
about if it's hard. We kind of just maybe we say fake it till you make it, right? You put on that face that no, everything is wonderful, and we don't really let people see the difficulties of life. And so I look at how I grew up, and I'm so blessed. I'm so thankful for the childhood and the upbringing that I had. But as I was married, had my first child, those challenges that began to come were challenges that arose because life wasn't meeting expectations.
Mm.
Life didn't look like that perfect fairy tale that I thought it should look like.
Mm.
That all those, great, wonderful Christian romance novels make it look like. Um, and even, not even realizing the difficulties that my own parents had faced is just kind of
Mm.
you step into this new role of being a wife and then being a mom, and you're not really expected you're not really expecting what's the reality of that. And so I found myself kind of in that position. My first child was born, and Unfortunately, at that time, I gained a lot of weight in that pregnancy, and so
Mm.
here I am. My husband and I were married uh, barely a year. I think we had our first daughter 1 month before our first year anniversary.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
you're still trying to learn how to be a wife, and
Yeah.
then you have a baby on top of that, and then I had such major changes to my body. I lost my confidence. I didn't really uh, know how I was supposed to fit into these roles, yet all the while trying to just have that look on my face that's like, yes,
Mile.
I've got this all together. This is wonderful. And so just the difficulties starting out and not giving myself the room to really discover, Lord, who am I in this role? Who do you want me to be? Unfortunately, I kind of shoved that thought aside and just thought, this is who I'm supposed to be. This is how it is. And so as time progressed, then with that mentality of I have to fit into this expectation that I've always had of myself, um,
Which
it
is to
became
be all together, to
yes,
be
yes,
happy, to not have any struggles.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think I mean, I know you're going to get into this, but it varies, I think, from parts of the country to other parts. It varies generationally. I feel like Gen
Mm.
Zs are really gifted in being really honest with each other. I think that's beautiful, you know. But as you go up the ladder of ages, you see more and more that I have to put it be all together and possibly in your culture, your church culture, you know, your family that affects it as well. Okay, so now
Yeah.
what happens? So you're not meeting those expectations and you're a little bit surprised. So now what?
So then my husband and I experienced loss. We had a miscarriage.
Mm,
I was
sorry.
pregnant with our second child, and I was in a car accident. I was
Oh
hit by
wow.
a reckless driver, and we lost that baby. And no one ever prepares you for that kind of
No,
loss,
no.
especially in today's society. I think so many people don't understand the depth of that loss. So many people would say things like, "Oh, well, at least you didn't have that baby in your arms
Mm,
and then
mm,
lose your baby." And
mm.
well, yeah, I mean, I'm thankful that I didn't have to go through that, but that doesn't make my loss or my pain any less significant. But I didn't
Right.
understand that at the time. And my husband didn't either. This was something that no one could have prepared us for. And so you add this deep loss and this deep grief on top of already trying to just keep it together, just
Mm.
trying to be that girl. That I grew up in church, and when my husband and I got married, I brought him back to New Mexico. We went back to that same church that I had grown up in. So everybody knew me, everybody expected me to be this girl, right? That
Uh-huh.
had it all together, that always had a smile on her face, that always had the right Sunday school answer for everything, right? And so you add this depth of loss where I was just
Mm,
floundering, but yet I couldn't be honest with myself, much
mm.
less be honest with anybody else. I couldn't
Okay.
be honest with myself that I was lost, that I did not know who I was supposed to be or what I was supposed to do or how I was supposed to handle this. And
Mm.
so you just put on the mask and
Yeah.
you try to keep moving forward. And unfortunately, 6 months later, my husband and I had another loss.
Oh, wow.
I had been able to get pregnant after we lost the first one. And this time I was much further into my second trimester and went to the doctor for a normal checkup. And that awkward silence of the nurse who can't find the heartbeat, has to go
Oh,
get the
wow.
doctor. And I
Oh,
mean, just the
wow.
whole thing
That's
was
awful.
happening all
Mm.
over again. And
Sorry.
so here we are, thank you. We are already trying to just make our way through the first wave of
Sure.
loss and
Mm.
grief and not understanding it. And then we were hit with it again. And I think that this series of events, getting married, and well, it's exciting, but you know what? It's new territory and it's
Yeah,
hard to
yeah.
figure out.
Yeah.
And
And
that
you
not
had a
really,
child, right? You had
yes, we
a
had a
baby
child.
or a young girl, right?
Yes, and
That you
motherhood
had to,
wasn't
yeah.
what I had expected it to be. I just thought it's just this magical thing, and I can look at it now. I have four kids, all these ages, and it is magical, but in a completely different way than I ever
Yeah.
imagined magical would be. And
Yeah.
and then this last on top of it, and I just kept putting, mask after mask, band-aid after band-aid to just say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, right? It's those t-shirts you see where the cat's like kind of going crazy. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. I was not fine, but I could never admit that to myself.
How about
Um,
your husband? How was he in all that?
he was also, I think, same path, just
Okay.
not realizing that we were doing it. It was not a choice that we both made to say,
Mm.
no, we're fine, we're fine, we're fine, but we're really not fine. It
Uh-huh.
was just this, no, we have to be fine. We just have to keep moving forward. We just have to keep keep going. Um,
So you
and
must have
so
shut down
we
emotionally
did.
a
We
lot,
did. We both
especially to
did.
each other.
Yes, yes, which
Yeah.
that makes it difficult. That makes relationships difficult. That makes our marriage difficult. That makes our home difficult. Those kinds of things that are like we should be able to really draw on each other, but both of us kind of
We're
retreating
both
in.
hurting. Yeah, that's
Yes, it
hard.
was it was very, very difficult. And in the process, I began to lose even more of my self-confidence. I really lost who I was. And I began to look to other people and their opinions to determine who I was, to give me value, to give me worth. And I don't want to say that my husband didn't give me worth. Please don't think that. He did, but I didn't see it. I didn't receive that. I looked to everybody else to say, who am I supposed to be? Because I didn't know anymore. And I couldn't have put this into words at the time, but I look back now and I realize I did not know who I was until I walked in a room and saw who was there. Then I would know who I was. Based on the people that were in the room, I would know what role I was supposed to fill.
Mm.
And that's exhausting. It
So
is
you were
such an
probably
exhausting
always
place to
doing
be.
that, but even as a kid, it sounds like in
Yes,
that culture, but it worked.
it
It
did.
worked before, but now
Yeah.
you're going through deep grief and pain and struggle, and
Yes.
it doesn't work.
It
Yep.
doesn't. It doesn't
Mm.
work. And unfortunately, I wish I could say I began to learn the lesson at that point, but unfortunately, the Lord had to take us through a little bit more fire, and we had some major friendships and betrayals and hurts, church hurt that we experienced. And then my parents got divorced after 34 years of marriage.
Oh
Talk
wow.
about a wake-up call that everything's not perfect,
Right.
everything's
Yeah.
not fine.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like, my world was falling apart. Everything I had always thought I was, the person I always expected myself to be, was not matching what I felt inside. It wasn't something
And
that I could look to with confidence. It was
yeah,
just gone. It was
and it sounds
completely
like a
being shattered.
expectation of what life should be.
Yes.
Like, well, my parents would be happily married until they die, and I'll have lots of kids, and I'll be healthy and happy, and our marriage will be nice and sweet and encouraging all the time, and everybody at church will love us, and right,
Yes.
that's also an expectation of our world
Yes.
and how
Yes.
we fit in that.
Yeah. And when all of that begins to be shattered, it's like, well, what do I have now if I
Mm,
don't have these expectations? If these
mm,
expectations are not being met or lived up to, where does that leave me?
yeah.
And so the Lord graciously took us, away from the church that we were in where we experienced the hurt, and just kind of took my husband and I on a new path. In the meantime, we had my son, and so we had two little kiddos at the time, and we kind of just began searching, what are we supposed to be doing? And actually, no, we had three. Sorry, my third one was already born by this time. Um, and so we kind of just began a new path of being able to come together and say, hey, look, we've got to be able to break down these walls. We've got to be able to really heal from all of this hurt and loss and grief. I mean, even going back to the miscarriages, we
Hmm.
have to allow ourselves to heal and to process the loss that it truly was and how that affected us and how it
Yeah.
affected our thinking and how it affected how we saw ourselves and how we saw the world and how we saw our God. And so we really began to enter this time of healing where the Lord allowed us to just have a beautiful reconciliation of um, this is who He's called us to be. And there is unknown territory ahead, and that's okay because the expectation is now to truly just live up to the purpose that He called us here for, which is to glorify our Father in heaven. And so we began really looking with these fresh eyes of, okay, Lord, who are you calling us to be? What do you want us to do? Where do you want us to be? And He led us to a church for a season where it really allowed us to find some healing. It really allowed us to kind of regain our passion for serving. I'd always served in ministry. My husband grew up as a missionary kid, so he always had been serving in missionary, but as a missionary and in service. But after our church hurt, both of us were we were tapped. And we needed that time of healing. And the Lord allowed us to have that at this beautiful church that we were a part of for a while. And then the Lord began stirring and He began moving us. And He began really, for me, opening my eyes to the reality that I had been living so long trying to meet up to everyone else's expectations, and that I had placed unrealistic expectations on myself, and that it was time to clear that and to consider what were the expectations my creator had on me and Him alone, because that's the only expectation that mattered. And as I was able to begin shifting my focus to that and reading God's word, looking for that and learning every time I would open His word, what do I learn about my God? And therefore, what does that tell me about me as His creation?
Mm.
And I began to realize that for so long, even as a child, I always needed that validation from people. And as an adult, that gets harder and harder. Children, it's understandable, right? They look to
Mhm.
mom and dad, they look to the leaders in their lives to say, "Hey, am I doing good?" Because
Yeah.
that's how we're teaching and we're training our kids. But as an adult, that doesn't work anymore because who are you looking to for that approval? We
Yeah.
need to be looking to our creator. And so being able to shift and decide it was time to let go of other people's expectations. It was time to let go of their opinions, and it was time to stop gaining my value from others and instead gain it from the Father was just life changing for
Mm.
me.
Yeah.
And as I began to do that, I saw the Lord begin to lead me into these situations and scenarios where I thought, are you kidding me? I can't do this. I've never done this before in my life. Uh, he led me. I've never been interested in, policy or politics. I've always been like, no, I will vote, but then I want to stay out of it. Well, the Lord ended up leading me into a nonprofit faith-based policy group where we advocate for biblical values and policy. And that was one of those things that I thought I never would have looked at all of these expectations of other people and looked at the value that other people gave me and thought it possible for me to do this type of role. Yet, when I let go of everyone else's opinions and I focused in on my creator's opinion and the fact that He had told me that I was worthy of His love, that He showed me that by dying on a cross for me, that He gives me worth, that He as my creator is the only one who gives me my true worth. And I see that and I say, okay, my creator is calling me to do something outside of my box. He's going to help me do that. Instead of being held back because it's like, oh no, all these other people, they don't give me enough worth to think that I could do that. But when you let go of that and you look at your creator and you see you're calling me to this and you're the one who made me, you're must going to be about to give me exactly what I need to do this. And so there's been several situations in my life since then that I have seen Him do that. And it's amazing because that confidence has been returning, not in myself, not in anything that I can do, but in the fact that I belong to Him. And so, the sky's the limit. He can do whatever he wants to do in me and through me. And all I have to do is trust and be obedient. And it is so freeing to live in that truth that my value is intact. My worth is intact no matter who is in my life and no matter what opinions they have, because it comes from him and him alone.
Yeah, so your approval is really coming from him and guidance and what to be doing and yeah,
Yes.
that's very good. So you went through this really hard time of grief and you pulled out of the one church and but I'm curious like what the grief process was like that got you to it's like a hurdle. I feel like it's yeah, because you told us this is where we're at and we went through all this grief and then God healed it and then we were in this whole next step, right? But first the healing has to really happen. So how did that come about? Was there counseling involved? Was there a friend came along, a grief share? What happened?
Well, so honestly, I'm a licensed mental health counselor.
Okay.
I began to apply some of the rules and the things that I had learned that I was able to use to help my clients. I was able to take that and be able to begin to apply it to myself. And the first step was just being honest. I'm not okay.
Okay.
And me saying that I'm not okay doesn't diminish my worth, doesn't diminish my value. It's honesty. It's being authentic. I
Did you
don't
do
have
that
it
with
all together.
others? Were you able to start doing it with others?
Yes, and I think the way first it started with my husband of being able to just be real with each other. Hey, we're not okay. I'm not okay. You're not okay. We're not okay. We've got to be willing to say that if we have any room for growth.
Mm.
Um, and to then be real with the Lord, someone who always desired approval. Of course, I want the approval of my Heavenly Father as well. But to me, that looked like, oh, I can't complain to the Lord. I can't go to the Lord and tell him that I'm hurt. I can't I can't tell him or verbalize to him, I'm not okay with this, Lord.
Mm.
And so I never did. I always just was like, okay, okay, this is what's happening. Okay, keep a smile on your face. And so for me, the two most important people that honesty came with was between me and the Lord and between me and my husband. To be able to put it out there and say, after being honest with myself, to be able to go to the Lord and say, I'm not okay. I don't like this. I'm not comfortable. I don't want to be here. I don't want to walk through this. I don't like who I am today. I don't like how I've handled things. I don't like it. I'm not happy. To admit to the Heavenly Father that it's just like I'm a mess and I'm gonna
Mm.
own that. I think that was one of the biggest things for me. You talk about those masks that you wear. A lot of times you're not just fooling all of the people around you, we begin to fool ourselves. We begin to
Mm.
fool ourselves into thinking, yeah, no, I'm okay. I'm okay, right? And as a counselor, I use the example all the time with clients that, we kind of just sweep things under the rug and we say, nope, I'm okay. It's okay. Just sweep that. It's not it's not a big deal. You sweep it under the rug. But pretty soon that rug is about this high.
There's a
And
big lump. You trip
we
on it.
can't ignore the rug anymore because we've swept so much underneath it. And so kind of just pulling the rug back and saying, okay, what's here? What is it over the past several years, over my entire life, that I've not been honest with myself about, that I've put on a mask for, that I've pretended, that I've, done the dance or whatever it was to just make things just keep moving forward when maybe all I needed was just to stop and be still and to recognize that I couldn't expect myself to heal overnight. I think that
Yeah.
was one thing for me. It's like, oh, I can have my emotion, but I better be fine in about 5 minutes, or I better be fine by the next morning. To give myself that freedom to process
Yeah.
and to allow new waves of grief to come, to allow new things to be presented before me as I considered what was wrong, what the problems were, what I had never dealt with. to give myself the permission to see new things, to not think, okay, today is the day that I grieve. Today is the day that I pick out all the things that weren't okay, and I'm going to label them, and then I'm going to move on. But you know what? In 2 weeks, in 4 months, in a year, I might find something else that's like, oh, wow, I need to deal with that, right? To give yourself the permission to
Mm,
take the time. That is what set me on that path
mm,
to begin the healing process. And I think that's so important because I think that a lot of people have a misconception of grief and of healing, that grief sets you back and grief keeps you stuck. But if we don't allow ourselves to experience grief, then we will never move forward.
yeah.
And so we'll think that we're moving forward because out of sight, out of mind, but we're not.
You
It's
stuffed it
just
down.
this,
Yeah.
yes,
And it's
yes.
going
And
to come
so
out in other ways. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I
It's
think that was
interesting.
the beginning, what was
Yeah.
necessary for that process.
So
Um,
in my new book, Shaking Off the Shackles, I look at Nehemiah, like weaving my own story with Nehemiah. And the first part, the rebuild, he talks from a prophecy, rebuild, restore, renew. And in rebuild, the whole thing was he had to go in and he had to clear out the rubble, But even before he did that, he grieved. He heard the news that Jerusalem was desolate and horrible, and people were impoverished, and thieves would come in and steal, and there was no wall to protect them, and the temple had to be bare and empty, or people would steal the good things in it.
mhm.
And so he literally wept for 4 months and waited on the Lord and prayed and grieved and poured out his heart to God. And it's actually a beautiful thing. He didn't just jump in and try to fix it, or like you said, move on with life, or say, okay, I'll go talk to the king today, but he really waited on God. But in the process, he worked through his own sadness. And I'm sure there was a multiplicity of emotions that he went through. In fact, in the back of the book, I do this in a conference as well. I call it Thrive, not just Survive. And at that point, after we go through that section, we there I have a chart of emotions, and there's like 200 emotions on there. They're kind of categorized. Ones that we deem more positive, ones we deem more negative, but we really shouldn't, right? Because sometimes
Right,
we do need to just be angry. That's not negative. How we express that anger could be negative, but
right.
and sadness, that's not a negative. That's just an emotion, right? So I have everybody kind of go through that and find new words, because sometimes we don't know the words. As I actually did this, and in the book, as I'm writing, I said, okay, I'm going to try something here. I'm going to put words, picking from these charts, words that I don't usually use to describe how I'm feeling through this loss. I think that time it's when my mom was dying.
Mm.
And I found it was amazing. I kind of, I'm picking all these new words, but they were, they helped me go deeper, I guess, to better understand. So just the verbalizing, like with your husband, right? Getting to
Yes,
talk that through. The hard thing, though, right? Did you find this is that sometimes your spouse, the way that he grieves, can be different than how you grieve?
yes,
And that can be really rough. Like my
yes,
friend, her son died, and she just needed to cry and be angry and meet with people and say, why God, and da 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 da. And then he just goes off to work. He just wanted to work all the time. So that can be challenging.
yes, yes. Our grief is very different. We walk through it differently, and so we have to be willing to, first of all, be patient with ourselves for our own grieving process, but to be patient and gracious with our spouse or someone else, whoever it is that we're
Whoever's
walking through that
affected.
grief with. Yes, whoever's affected, because that grief looks different, and we can't look at them and say, you're not grieving because it
Yeah.
doesn't look like mine. We have to be patient and honest, and we have to communicate. That's one thing my husband and I really learned is we have to verbalize with each other. We
Mm,
have to
mm,
communicate what we're thinking. I cannot expect him to read my mind, and he cannot expect me to read his. And it's probably a good thing he doesn't read my mind, and it's a good thing I can't read his. But we have to be willing to communicate with each other and say, I'm not okay, or to say, I'm not ready to talk about this. It's not that I'm not thinking about it. It's not important, but I'm not ready. I'll let you know when I am. And then we have to follow through with that and truly come back to, okay, I'm ready to talk about this. Um, so that we give each other the grace necessary to be able to walk through whatever it is we need to walk through and then communicate that with each other.
So, how did you work through all that with God? Where was God in all that?
Mm.
I mean,
You know,
initially you're probably a little angry, right?
yeah, yes. Well, I don't know if anger was the word. I would say just more hurt and broken and
Mm,
confused.
mm,
You begin to ask the Lord, Lord, did I do something wrong? Am I being
mm.
punished? Or is there a lesson you're trying to teach me? Can you help me just learn it already so we can be done with this? Um, and so really being able to go to the Lord and say, I'm not okay. I'm hurting. I don't understand. And just being able to, prayer is a two-way street, right? So often we think of prayer and we're just, let me talk, 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 talk. We
Hmm.
have to sit and listen. And I remember I've had many, many times where I sit for my prayer time and I end up just sitting there in silence. And I just, Lord, I'm listening. And allowing myself to kind of vent before the Lord. Lord, I don't like this. Maybe it wasn't anger towards the Lord, but it was anger at other people in my life. It was anger at situations. Um, the first loss, anger towards the person that hit my car, anger towards the people who had really broken my heart, in friendship and relationship, and anger towards my church that had hurt me, and so on. Just being able to tell the Lord that, and then just being in His Word, of course. I've, I don't like to say, okay, Lord, where do I need to read today? I just want to say, Lord, this is where I'm reading, and just speak to me because His Word is alive and active, right? It is always
Mm.
relevant. And so it just seems like whether it was in my scripture reading for the day or it was something that he brought back to me from years past that I had hid in my heart, his word would come back to me. And either it was reminding me of who I was in him, it was reminding me of his love for me, it was reminding me of the fact that he will be my defender when I didn't think things were fair or just. And I really, I was like, I know vengeance is yours, Lord, but I would really like to be able to witness it. I'd really like to be able to see that. And then the Lord kind of like, now, Jodi, kind of reminding me I'm supposed to pray for my enemies. And it's like, okay, how do I do that? And so just beginning those steps, but seeing the Lord prompting the whole way, seeing the Lord guiding, um, was it's just something that I craved. And I began to look for more and more because I realized more than ever, this isn't about me. This life is not about me. It's not about my desires and my wants. It is about how I am glorifying my Father in heaven. And so being willing to turn that and say, Lord, even in my brokenness,
Mm,
even through my tears, even through my heart being, ripped out of my chest, how can I glorify you?
mm,
Being willing to ask that, you get an answer. And situation by situation, day by day, moment by moment, little things come up, and you begin to see that you have a choice. You have a choice in that moment to allow the Lord to be glorified in your situation, or to take it into your own hands and hold on to the bitterness and hold on to the anger and hold on to the hurt and try to do whatever you want to do with it and take control. You
mm.
have that choice. And the more you make that choice of, Lord, how can you be glorified in this moment? Doesn't mean that, oh, that was so great. I saw the Lord glorified and now I'm healed and I don't have any more grief. It's not like that. I wish it was. But it's what takes us along that healing path that begins to really mend our hearts to see. okay, I still may not understand it. I may never understand it
Or
until the day I see him face to face. But I do see that the Lord is in control. I choose to trust that. I see how he can be glorified in different situations. And I choose that. I choose the joy of the Lord rather than allowing myself to sit and wallow. And that doesn't mean, because I don't sit and wallow, it doesn't mean that I um, am not realistic about my grief or the hurt. It doesn't mean that I minimize it or that I sweep it under the rug. It means that I acknowledge it, I feel it, I express it to the Lord, but I choose the joy of the Lord.
yeah, it's really how the Psalms are written. You're really describing that, which I'm sure
Yeah,
helped you because, right,
absolutely.
David would lament and whine and complain and all that.
Yep,
And
yep.
and then at the very end he'd be like, "But I trust you." There was one
Yes.
he didn't even say that actually, but most of them he did and
Yeah,
and I'm gonna trust that you are who you say you are, even if it
yes.
doesn't feel like it at the moment. Yeah, I another a book I wrote before this current one is called Broken but Undefeated, and I took the characters from Isaiah or from Hebrews 11 and I went through
Mm,
each of their stories and I was looking at what did they grow in or learn about faith that's different from the next guy that's talked or woman talked about. It was a really cool journey. It's written like a devotional, um but it sounds like that idea of broken but undefeated,
mm,
like they all the characters in there had a breaking moment or moments or times or
yeah,
continuous times. But yet they weren't defeated. They continued to have faith in God. So
yes.
yeah, it's a cool journey. So I'm curious with the name of your book, hashtag no filter. Why did you call it that? And what is your book about?
So, this idea that I talked about through my journey of realizing all of the masks that I had put on, they were really just filters, right? Social media today tells us filter is beauty. You don't see a photo on Facebook or Instagram or anywhere without some kind of filter on it, right? Oh, it looks so pretty. The setting is great. Everything is that picture perfect. You don't see all of the, failed attempts to get that picture taken. You don't see all of the blemishes that were covered in the filter. You don't see any of that because society tells us that that's not pretty. We don't want that. And so, just like our social media posts where we're putting filters on, trying to create this really great image or look, just the reality that we do that in our walks, just our day to day, our lives, we filter who God created us to be because those filters are what we think we should be, are what we think others expect of us, based on society, based on our communities, our circumstances. For me, the growing up in this specific church, everybody knew me. They expected me to be that talented girl that always was, just on and had the right answer, like I said before. Pretty soon, before I knew it, those were filters that I put in place because I didn't have it all together. I didn't have all the right answers, but I never felt like I could just say, I don't know. I had to come up with something, right? And so trying to continue to be that person, whether it was their expectations or my own expectations, you put these filters on to say, no, I'm good. I'm okay. This is who I am. But really, what we're doing is we're distorting God's original design.
Mm,
And so the idea of the book, hashtag no filter, unmasking the woman God created you to be, is really this idea of as creations of the creator himself, we need no filter. That
mm,
we need to find the freedom of dropping those filters, dropping those things that we have put in place to try to meet everyone else's expectations, and be concerned instead with meeting the creator's expectations. Because guess what? He created you as you are. He created you on purpose and with purpose. You don't need the filters of this society. You don't need the filters of being the perfect mom. You don't need the filter of having it all together. You don't need the filter of, always being spot on. You don't need any of those filters. The only filter you truly need is the blood of Jesus. And he gives that freely. And that filter, we could call it, is really what washes everything away, right? To truly show who he's created us to be. And so instead of living life with all these filters and all these masks, it's time to embrace your divine design, who God created you to be, drop those filters and step out in freedom of living the life that God created you to live as the woman that you were created to be.
That's great. It's so funny. The subtitle of my book is Live Out Your Divine Birthright and Thrive Like Never Before. I bet our chapters are similar now. It just takes a different angle.
The
So,
Bible study walks through Paul's prayer for the Ephesians when he prays for them that the eyes of their hearts would be enlightened. And what is this as he prays this prayer that they would see all of these things? And so while we're trying to understand what it is to have the eyes of our hearts enlightened and what it is to have the hope of his calling and the glorious inheritance of the saints and all of those things that Paul is praying, we begin to see the filters that are in place that are scaling the eyes of our hearts, like Paul, literal scales on his eyes, right? And we want to have them removed. And so we walk through the process of recognizing what it is to live with the eyes of our hearts enlightened, what it is to recognize the filter. How do we recognize the filters that we have in place? Because they're different for everyone. How do we drop the filters? And once we've gotten to that reality of dropping the filters, how do we now embrace who God created us to be, what He has called us to do, the apparel that He's called us to live with, the position that He has given us as daughters of the King?
awesome. All right, one last question for you. So, you threw out a few times the expectation that God has. So, what do you think God's expectation of us is?
I think for every single person, there is the greatest expectation that we are supposed to glorify our Father in heaven. Yet everyone has a different calling of how to do that. So when we come to the reality of am I glorifying my Father in heaven? That is why I was created. We see that in creation when we walk through Genesis. We see that mankind was set apart and the only aspect of creation to have relationship with Him, the only aspect of relation given the breath of life. We see so many things that we were set apart for to really glorify Him, made in His likeness. And Scripture tells us that we are to glorify our Father in heaven. Yet everyone has a different way that they are called to do that. So whether it's through your profession, whether you're an accountant, a dentist, a school teacher, a garbage collector, a secretary, a cashier at a grocery store, a stay-at-home mom, in ministry, whatever it is, whatever your calling is, ultimately, you are to glorify your Father in heaven, which means that when people see us, they are drawn to Him. We are a reflection of Him. That is our purpose. That is who we were created to be here on this earth, however that looks like for you.
Okay. Yeah, I probably would use the word desire. That's his desire for us, only because an expectation, like I'm thinking, I expect you to do this. And so if you don't do it, then I'm really disappointed. And because God is not in our time, right? He knows our whole life from beginning to end. It's not like he's sitting around going, oh man, you're not bringing glory to me, you're bringing glory to yourself or whatever. He's not like shocked. Oh my goodness. He knows. But it's not, he has such a better life. I mean, we're on the same page, you and I. His desire for us is that we would live that abundant life, you know. But he's not shocked and he's aware that we are on this journey And like you had to go through these hard things, not that he necessarily caused them, but he knew that was going to happen. Um, but he also knew that that could get you to this place where you can take off the filters and you can really be yourself and thus bringing glory to God, right? Not,
Yes.
yeah. So um, I guess it's more just like how you define expectation. And for some people, like for you, I think that's a really positive word. For some of us, that might be like, oh my gosh, and I have to live up to that. Might be a negative, you know. So for those of you that that kind of makes you feel like, oh no, I'm really failing, you know, just maybe throw in the word desire. But for others, that's going to be like for you, Jodi, and for others, that's going to be very motivational, you know, that
Yeah.
yeah, wow, he has
Well,
this amazing expectation. Well, I like that too, right? Like he believes in me. Maybe that's a way to think of it. Like he believes that he can and will use my life in amazing ways to bring glory to him and to help other people. And I love that he like, you know, has that expectation as long as we understand that when we mess up because we do, you know,
yes.
we have our off days or whatever, or weeks or months, whatever, but that he's okay with that. He's just saying, I really believe in you. And yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah.
just wanted to throw that
Well,
in.
and I agree with that. That desire for us is to fulfill that purpose of glorifying him. I guess when I think of expectations from the Father, it's something that we're daily seeking him on. Well, Lord, how would you expect me or want me to respond to this situation? How would you expect me to walk through this? And that's, maybe he's just saying, I want you to trust me. So that's the expectation that he puts out for me today is, okay,
Mhm.
today's the day I got to trust. Or
Yeah.
today is the day that I you need to stand firm. Today is the day where I let him be my defender. Today is the day, you name it. And I think we can look at those of Lord, what do you expect of me? What does your word tell me that I should do in these situations? And help me to be focused on living up to that rather than worrying about what everyone else will think about it.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you. So where do we get your book and connect with you?
Well, you can join my email list on my website, jodihendricks.com. I send out weekly devotionals, so you can join my mailing list to be able to get a weekly devotional on my website. You can also see how you can connect with me on social media. But then also, right there on my website, you'll see the tab for the hashtag series, and that's where you can purchase hashtag no filter and stay up to date with the next series book in this hashtag Bible study series.
Awesome. And can they get that on Amazon? Or they
They sure can. Yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay, good
So
to
you
know.
can get it on Amazon. If you go to my website, that buy link is actually going to take you to Amazon. That way you don't have to try to search in Amazon for the right hashtag no filter. You can go, that link will take you from my website directly to an Amazon purchase link.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jodi. There's lots of great things to chew on. And, you know, we all go through these really hard times, and it's great perspective that you bring to us to help us walk through that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, so everybody share that with your friends. Tell them more about his heartbeat. Tell them about hashtag no filter. And looking forward to being back here again with y'all next week. Have a great week.